Welcome back. Today we're going to be covering the safety position for the 2025 NFL Draft. I feel like you have to get through a lot of film in order to properly evaluate a safety, so apologies for the delay, it's taken a fair bit of time, but if you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing as it greatly supports the channel. And we'll jump in with number 8, Lathan Ransom out of Ohio State, who is the only prospect out of the 8 I watched who I didn't see as a day 1 or day 2 prospect, because despite playing quite a lot of free safety for Ohio State, his lack of speed and fluidity will pretty much completely limit him to a strong safety role. He is competitive and reads the game well, which I have a lot of respect for, but honestly, his lists of strength end there for me. Even as a box safety, there are some inconsistencies, so I just can't quite find the value other than a useful player to have in the rotation. And then we jump to a third round evaluation at 7 with Jonas Sanka out of Virginia. I think Sanka could be a very consistent free safety in the NFL. He's pretty well built with 32-inch arms. His speed isn't outstanding, but it's enough, and I was pretty impressed by his fluidity in coverage. Sanka is competitive, tackles pretty well, and generally speaking, I did think he was fine when it came to his instincts, but there was just the odd lapse in concentration that led to him being in some very questionable positions, both in coverage and defending the run. It's hard not to see some Cooper DeJean when watching my number 6, Sebastian Castro, as they shared the Iowa colours, although interestingly, Castro is actually 2 years older than DeJean. So an older prospect at 24, and he wasn't quite the same this season after a mid-season ankle injury. This said, his experience shows up in his play recognition, and he utilises this when combining it with an aggressive approach to making plays in the backfield. He lacks the speed to thrive as a free safety, but he displays impressive fluidity and ball skills, which combined with his ability to get into the backfield could make him a very effective strong safety or nickel. This has started to become a bit of a trend in this year's draft class with the Georgia defenders, as the consistency of previous Georgia defenders entering the NFL seems to have made the analysis a bit lazy. And similar to Mykel Williams, I'm not even saying Malachi Starks is going to be a bad player. I have him as a third round evaluation at a position that isn't that valuable. In fact, I bet my evaluation isn't all that different to the ones who consider him a first round pick. I think he'll be a strong safety or a nickel, as he is somewhat limited in coverage. His speed is okay, although he doesn't possess much fluidity, so you want things to be in front of him. He does get blocked a bit too easily for someone who's going to probably provide their value close to the line of scrimmage, but he is one of the more consistent tacklers in the class. He's competitive, reads the game fairly well, so it's weird when I feel like I have to be critical of a prospect like this because I think he'll be fine, could be a consistent starter in the NFL. But when I have to explain why he's not a first rounder, which seems to be the consensus, I'm somewhat lost for words, because it's a bit like if someone asked me why my number 6, Sebastian Castro, isn't a first rounder. There's no glaring weakness that I claim to see that nobody else sees. There just isn't anything that makes me think he has even the upside of a first round worthy prospect. One of the most exciting prospects to watch for this video was Andrew Mukuba out of Texas, because he's 185 pounds, which combined with some erratic play style and technique has led to plenty of missed tackles. So when you put yourself in the shoes of a GM, could you really justify drafting a safety with these red flags? On the other hand, these are flaws that only show up once or twice a game. 90% of the time you watch him jump off the screen, he's explosive, fluid, displays excellent ball skills, which led to 5 interceptions this year. Mukuba has huge upside at free safety, but inconsistent tackling, as the last line of defense is a disaster waiting to happen. But as a nickel, I may feel stupid that I didn't commit to this one more when I look back, because the concerns are valid, but in that nickel position, he could be phenomenal from the jump. At number 3, I have Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. Watts has lots of good traits, but also some real weaknesses. His closing speed, ball skills, and full picture recognition could make him an excellent free safety, but the inconsistent tackling in the open field is a huge concern. I think the fact that Watts is fairly well built allows people to lose track of the fact that his tackling has been less consistent than the 185-pound Andrew Mukuba, who we've just spoken about. He could be an effective strong safety, but his hips will be too tight for him to cover many of the tight ends and running backs, so I don't think nickel is in the question, and having him so close to the line would kind of remove the value in drafting him. His instincts and closing speed are genuinely impressive. So I do think free safety is the way forward, but there is also some genuine risk here if the tackling doesn't improve. My number 2, Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina, is everything you want in a safety on paper. 6'3", 220 pounds with 32.5-inch arms and some genuine explosiveness. South Carolina didn't put him in many compromising coverage positions, but his hips are tight, which means everything needs to be in front of him coverage-wise, but his explosiveness will allow him to work in off-man coverage or at free safety, and I found his instincts in zone to be pretty sharp. He isn't the most formidable box safety, he just doesn't play with a ton of vengeance, but his speed means he is very often covering the ground that other defenders can't, and his long arms with the 220-pound frame have played their part in him being a very consistent tackler. In some ways, Emmanwori actually has a very high floor because he could be good as a free safety or as a box safety. But figuring out whether he has the fluidity and if the instincts are not just good but excellent to where he could be an elite free safety, or if he has the tenacity and aggressiveness to be an elite strong safety. If a team is looking at drafting Emmanwori in the first round, they'll want to have a clear idea of what his role is and why he's going to be a big difference maker in a not so valuable position. So those questions are what made me hesitate from having him as the number 1. The forgotten man in this safety class is my number 1, Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State. Winston suffered a partially torn ACL in week 2 of this season and did not return, but as long as he fully recovers, this is the best safety in this class. Winston is explosive and fluid with 32.5-inch arms. When you combine this with his tenacity and the fact that according to PFF, he didn't miss a tackle until his 3rd and final season with Penn State, he could be a fantastic nickel or strong safety. But what's even more exciting about Winston is that I think he could thrive at free safety as well, making him the ultimate chess piece. Now, there seems to be this idea floating around that he is really poor instinctually, and the only explanation I could find for this was the 2 games he played this season, because statistically speaking, these were quite literally the 2 worst games of his career. First of all, the injury actually came before week 2. He played on it because he thought it was a tweak, but he was actually playing with a partially torn ACL throughout the game versus Bowling Green, which was his worst of the 2 games. Second of all, if these are the plays that are causing people to label him as having bad instincts, I think that's a complete misconception. These are examples of him being put in compromising positions that most of the other safeties in this class simply weren't put in. Is there potential for him to improve instinctually? Absolutely. Which I think could be the difference between him being a borderline elite safety and him being a top 5 safety in the NFL. As it stands, he's 21. He was 20 when he last stepped onto the field and has played just 1 full season as a starter. These may be negatives to some, but I see a prospect who already has the clear, natural feel for the game. I really like the way he speaks when he interviews. He seems very bright, humble but motivated with a bit of an edge. I have no question that he's going to continue to develop and prove himself to be one of the most underestimated players in this class. At first, I wasn't particularly impressed by this safety class because I was underwhelmed by the likes of Xavier Watts and Malachi Starks, but the top end for me is actually Winston and Emmanwori, who I ended up having as first rounders, and the quality didn't drop off too much from Watts and Starks as I was impressed by the likes of Castro and Sanka. Plus, Andrew Mukuba is a bit of a wild card but could easily leave people wondering why he didn't go in the first round if he falls to the right team. So actually, a pretty solid class overall. I'll be covering tight ends next, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks so much for watching. If you are enjoying the content, please consider liking and subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time.